very interesting takeaway that I took out of Edinger's interview, okay, the one that was at the end of his life, 2 months before he died. And that was in the very last footnote where he's talking about drama. We're missing true drama, okay? And he talks about the 4 elements of drama, right? There's a contest, there's a defeat, there's lamentation, and then there's rebirth. And it struck me, and oh, by the way, that happens to be Edinger's Job archetype. And Jung's Job archetype, as explained by Edinger, right? And I got to thinking that's really the model for how we have an authentic life, okay? And it really explains why we have so many kids who have failed to launch now, okay? Because somehow in the, whatever it was, the late 70s, maybe 80s and 90s, mothers were trying to give their children everything and protect them from every bad thing. You didn't do this, right?
The stages again.
Okay, the stages are, there's a contest. Stage 1, contest. Stage 2, defeat. Stage 3, lamentation. Stage 4, rebirth. And for me, that's really a model for how you have an authentic life, okay? Because when I used to give people job interviews, even 30, 40 years ago when I was in Japan, I would always ask people, tell me the biggest mistake you ever made, okay? And usually people go, oh, you know, and, oh God, I can't tell a mistake. But the point is that if you've never made a mistake, you've never learned anything, okay? And I would tell people, I expect you to make a mistake every single day. If you're not making a mistake every day, you're not trying hard enough. Okay, I used to literally tell people that.
Can you imagine?
Okay.
That interview?
Right. I mean, you have to make a mistake. I mean, I used to tell not only interviewees, but employees who had been around for 5 years, I would say, if you're not making a mistake every day, you're not trying hard enough, right? Because you only learn from mistakes, right? And so you only learn from this rebirth process. And so in the contemporary world, a great example. Okay, first of all, Edinger is talking about how he was upset, and this is two months before his death, about the overwhelming nature of entertainment, quote unquote, and sports, quote unquote. And I got to thinking about that in the context of this, and you see what he's talking about. Okay, because people who go to a sporting event, for example, are living an inauthentic life. Okay, the only guys that count are the guys that are down there on the field. Okay, those guys are experiencing a defeat. They may have lamentation afterward, but then they're going to rebirth as a team, or, you know, if they've been injured or they're not up to the mark, they're going to go into some other line of work, right? But the people who just go to NFL games week after week, after year, they're not learning anything. Okay, they're projecting. They're
vicarious and safe.
It's vicarious experience, right? And so I got to thinking about The Voice as an example. The Voice is a great program. Why? Because it gives everybody a chance to become a famous singer, right? Now, mind you, after 10 seasons, the famous singers are still the same famous singers that we had back at the beginning, right? And where are the winners of The Voice today? You know. Well, I mean, in fairness, they were at the beginning of their careers, but the point is that when they go around the country and give these auditions, they're giving hundreds of thousands of kids an opportunity to live this fantasy, okay, to live the fantasy of becoming a rock star. And so there's a contest, okay, they get to go out there and they have to sing, they have to physically sing, and most of them get defeated right away. And so now they have to go home and lament that they didn't make it onto the show of The Voice. And that's probably a good thing, because then they're going to be reborn into being something else, right? And even for the winners, they have to contest, and they contest harder and harder and harder, and finally most of them are defeated, and then they lament, and then they're reborn into something that they should be. So it's kind of like Michelangelo chipping away at the statue of David, right? That, okay, lots of us can sit around in our homes when we're 14 and have a guitar and think, oh yeah, I can be Johnny Cash or whatever it is, right? But most of us can't, the truth be known. And so the wonderful thing about The Voice is that it gives you a chance to test that very early, okay? And so it seems to me that the way to have an authentic life is to make as many mistakes as possible throughout your life, okay? That's how you have this individuation experience. And you go through these stages of the Greek tragedy. Maybe you're going through it in 5 different venues, 5 different things that's happening in your life. But the more you have, and the more lamentations you have, and the more rebirths you have, the more you're going to get to the thing that you were meant to be, right? But if you're protected from that, you know, if you're protected from that, and your mom says, oh, you can't make it on The Voice, so, but, you know, you're good, your band's good here in town, and, you know, you can play weddings and so on, and you're good at that. You don't have to go to The Voice audition. And so he believes that, right? That's what Edinger is talking about and Job is talking about. So he believes that, and therefore he never does. He never goes to the up, but he also never goes down and never gets reborn.
Because he never gets to the point of the contest to begin with.
Well, he accepts the advice of the advisors, okay, in Job's context, where the advisors come in and give him all this advice, right? And so...
That's the corpse evangelist.
Pardon?
The corpse.
Oh, yeah.
The corpse evangelist.
Right, the corpse evangelist comes in and they say, oh, you'll never be anything, you know, and you must be wrong. You know, well, who wasn't wrong? Bob Dylan wasn't wrong. Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature, right?
He can't wait for somebody to tell him he's good or bad. In fact, a lot of people say he was bad, he just went on and did it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in college listening to Dylan, I thought he was terrible. I said, what the heck is this guy doing? You know, it's hard to have an authentic experience in a movie. I mean, it's good to have sort of an educational experience in a movie, it seems to me. So I learned that very often when I have an experience in life, suddenly a movie scene will come into my mind, and I'll be reminded of that event in a movie scene, and that taught me something about this situation I'm now living. So I think that that's useful. I mean, that's like fairy tales, right? Fairy tales were teaching kids.
It's tropes, it's metaphors, it's organizing. It's a way of organizing experiences.
Right.
In a metaphorical way, not a linear explanation.
Right, but because of that, the image comes to your mind, right?
Red Riding Hood.
A Little Red Riding Hood, yeah. If you read Little Red Riding Hood when you were a kid with your mother, then, you know, that kind of warned you against going off with witches, right? And
Just warned me to stay away from grandmother.
That had mustaches.
but you know, but it did warn you about something, right? But it wasn't an experience with the greater personality. That was just learning the rules, okay?
Like Aesop's fables.
Yeah, and so movies sort of serve that fairy tale function for us today. They, you know, show us what it's like to. I guess Moonlight is about a gay man. I didn't know what the topic was,
I
but
haven't seen that one either.
yeah, but you know, it shows us what it's like to live that life, and if we know what it's like to live that life, then maybe we can be a little bit more compassionate toward that person, right? I think that's the point. And so that's fine. That's teaching us sort of what the reasonable rules are to be an American. That we can be compassionate toward our fellow Americans who may be gay. But that doesn't mean you've experienced it, really, okay? And so what I'm saying is that these rebirths are happening all the time to all of us. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so...
But you started out talking about, I guess there are these kids that don't experience any of that. They're just sort of shepherded through.
Right. So we've had all these extremely protective parents who've taken kids everywhere and let them join all the teams and went and fought for their kids when they didn't make the team and that sort of stuff. So do you concur with this, John, that maybe this is the way we have to learn, this Job archetype, that we have to just get ourselves out there and make mistakes?
I always skip the lamentation phase and went right into rebirth.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, why worry about it? Just,
I have a favorite story about this, which was numinous when I heard it, and I often tell it. Okay, it's the story of Jascha Heifetz, who was a maestro musician, a violinist, right, in the mid-20th century. And Heifetz had a student, and the student had a problem because his family had a business, and when his father died, his family wanted him to take over the family business, but he was obviously quite a good musician because he was taking violin lessons from Jascha Heifetz, who was like the best violinist in the 20th century. And so he goes to the maestro and he says, "Well, maestro, I want to play for you, and I want you to tell me whether I have a future in a concert career as a musician, or whether I should just go into business, into my family business." And Jascha Heifetz says, "Very well, play for me." And so the guy plays the Lark Ascending. Okay, I don't know if you know that piece, but the Lark Ascending is an amazing violin piece. And at the end of it, Heifetz says, "Well, you don't have the fire. You don't have the fire." And so the guy is very dejected, of course, but he goes off into business, and he has a successful business career. And 20 years later, the maestro is having a concert in his city, so he goes to the concert, and afterward he goes backstage, and there's this big reunion with the maestro, and then the maestro said, "Well, what have you done with your life?" And the guy said, "Well, you know, I went into business, but you know, I really feel like I missed something when I gave up the violin, and Heifetz says, "Oh my God, you gave up the violin! How could you do that?" He says, "You played so beautifully," you know, and the guy, you know, and the guy says, "But maestro, you said I didn't have the fire." And Heifetz says, "Well, I must have been right, because if you had had the fire, you would have paid no attention to me."
Oh, what a good lesson that is.
And that's really this lesson, isn't it? Really. Which is that if you're meant to be something, you're going to be it, right?
And I think some people position themselves so that they can filter students that way, or so that they can discourage them, and the ones that rise up in spite of it are
Make
the
it like a
ones that,
challenge and
yeah, they want to see who's got the fire.
Right. But that, you know, that was always a numinous story to me. I mean, I must have heard that story 40 years ago, and I've probably told it 300 times over the years, because it's very powerful. But
It really makes you think.
yeah, and meanwhile, I mean, it's right back to this archetype, isn't it? It's right back to the Job archetype.
I saw some people, students, I used to sort of filter them coming into Ohio State. We get like 200 people a year, and you can only take maybe 4.
Mm-hmm.
So I would see these people with incredible talent, but they had no fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I would try to nudge them. You're the one, right? And they couldn't catch it. They just, I think they just wanted to be shepherded in on a throne, and since they weren't, they just went, "Oh well."
yeah, you think that was generational? Part of everyone gets a trophy.
I see that a lot.
Yeah, everybody gets a trophy.
That's been very damaging.
Yeah, hugely damaging, hugely. And so I think if there's one lesson that we want to send out to the world here, it's that you can't mollycoddle your kids. You got to have them make mistakes. They got to make a lot of mistakes. The more mistakes they make, the better it is, because the faster they'll find out who they are and figure out what they need to be doing.
As long as you keep loving them.
As long as you keep loving them, right?